everyone. Welcome to another one of our weekly updates here at NC Family. I'm Mitch, joined by Jerry and John today, and it is the week ending of May 9th, and it has been a busy week, gentlemen.
It sure
here
has.
In our office and also at the Legislative Building. It is crossover week. It was crossover week this past week. Of course, May 8th being crossover day. Tell us what crossover is. A refresher for those of you that have already heard it. You know what it is. For those of you that haven't, here it is.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Basically, crossover deadline is a date, an arbitrary date that's set in the House and Senate rules by which bills that don't affect the budget or finance, like raising taxes, those non-budgetary related bills have to pass their chamber of origin in order to remain eligible for the remainder of the session. And so legislators are working like crazy during the couple of weeks before crossover deadline to try to get their bills heard in committee, passed through committee and onto the floor of their respective chamber, and then passed by their respective chamber, so those bills will remain eligible for the rest of the session. And so lots of activity, lots of interest, and we saw literally consideration of hundreds of bills in the General Assembly during the past couple weeks.
Yes. It is an interesting time because I know we've mentioned to y'all over 1,500 bills have been filed this session. That means with this crossover deadline, there are hundreds of bills that have not moved, that will not move at all now. And in some cases, that's good. There's some things that we see introduced, we're going, oh, I hope that's not going anywhere. There are some that we're aware of that we had hoped would move, but they haven't. But what we want to do is share some of the ones out of these hundreds that did move.
Knowing how a bill becomes a law, it has to go through rules. And when those rules chairmen, the Senate and House rules chairmen said, all right, that's it, no more rules meetings, there were a lot of either really happy or really not happy, unhappy people in the building. Let's go through some of these bills that you've no doubt heard us talk about, but we're going to give you a little bit of a recap of where they are. Parental rights bills, specifically SB 442 and HB 519. Let's talk about the Parents Protection Act, SB 442.
Yeah, and bottom line is this bill just ensures that parents are able to raise their children according to their children's biological sex, as either male or female. And so parents can't be accused of abuse or neglect if they do not support or affirm a child's gender dysphoria or gender confusion and desire to be acknowledged or recognized by a different name or a different gender.
All right. And this relates to families, talking about biological families as well as adoptive families, that this would not exclude potential adoptive families from being considered as adoptive parents. And I know we're going to mention it a little bit, but in the debate on these, we hear the different worldviews that people have about parental rights and who should be deciding what's in the best interest of children. Of course, and making exceptions in some of these laws when there's abuse or neglect.
Yes.
And so some of the emotions were very high in the discussion on some of these bills.
Well, and we have seen in states like California and Colorado where the state has come in and literally taken children away from their parents.
That's absolutely right.
Because their parents do not affirm a move toward gender transition or the confusion that the child is experiencing regarding their biological sex and how they want to be identified. And so there's just cause for this kind of legislation.
And some of them, it's where they're considering legislation and people go, well, why are we doing this? Well, because we know there are states that are considering making it legal for the state to take this action. So North Carolina's being proactive.
Exactly, not reactive.
And moving in this direction.
Well, and I think we have to start with the general premise, not the exception, but the rule that parents parent their children best. Of course, there are exceptions in cases of abuse and neglect, but we can't govern or legislate from that exception. We have to govern and legislate from the rule that parents truly know what's best for their children.
And the courts have consistently ruled, the United States Supreme Court and the North Carolina Supreme Court and other courts, that parents have a fundamental right and a responsibility to raise their children and to determine with whom they associate and look out for their education and their health care. There was a big parental rights bill, a significant bill that was passed last session, and this just affirms and builds on top of that in this particular arena.
Speaking of parental rights bills, the Parental Medical Bill of Rights, HB 19. That passed the House. It talk very quickly about that loophole, that giant hole there that this is seeking to fill.
And we mentioned this before.
Yeah.
Over 50 years ago, there was a law passed that would allow exceptions for parents to be involved, where minors themselves could consent to certain medical care. It relates to mental health, some to physical health, and what this bill would do is do away with those exceptions and say, no, parents do need to be involved.
Yes.
It also included parents having access to medical records of their children. Quite honestly, for a lot of us, it's bizarre that this ever happened in our state law. I think, again, it's where people are looking maybe at cases of abuse and neglect. In those cases, these laws would not preclude abuse or neglect to work around those situations where parents wouldn't be involved. But again, it comes back to the general rule and the general worldview that we have. God designed parents to be in that role, to look out for what's best for their children.
And what this bill does is acknowledge that parents need to be aware of, informed of, and involved when their minor children are treated for things like sexually transmitted diseases, controlled substance and alcohol abuse, and or mental disorders or disturbances. Specifically, those areas were kind of carved out, and minors were allowed to consent themselves without their parents' knowledge for these kinds of treatments.
Right.
And so this bill would rectify that and make it consistent with, again, the Parents' Bill of Rights that was passed last legislative session.
Of course, one of those being a Senate bill, SB 442, and one of those being a House bill, H519. Both of those bills, of course, have crossed over and will be hopefully heard by the other chamber in the coming weeks.
And if you lose track of those bill numbers, there's a link
Yes.
to a report that we sent out yesterday
Yes.
that is a kind of a comprehensive view of these select bills that we're sharing about today. So if you want more information, if you want a link to not only those bills, but also learn about the bill sponsors, who are the primary initiators of this legislation in both the House and the Senate, all that information is contained in that report. And we would encourage you to take advantage of that.
So if you've got an email, if you're on our website, or you're on YouTube right now, go down to the bottom when you're finished watching this, and you can or click on that link to follow that story about our crossover deadline. Let's talk about welfare for women and children, or welfare of women and children. I'd be very careful there. HB 83, a law to revise governing practices for minors. That's something we talked about a long time ago. It seems like a very long time ago, back in February and March. Tell us a little bit about where that is, what's going on with that.
Well, this is, again, you think in today's world, I think we're all not just troubled, almost horrified by what children are exposed to, what's accessible through phones, pads,
Yes.
and what's happening, thankfully, is people are finding ways for laws to address these issues and to have consequences for people who are the cause of this kind of exposure that's happening to children. And so this is one that would, cause the penalty. Obviously, the reason for penalties and laws is to try to deter harmful activity,
Yes.
and this is one of those bills that would do that.
So this kind of was a story from Representative Torbett from Gaston County and a young lady. And so this is making its way through the process, making sure that those who commit these types of offenses, and the people who are victims, they get the justice that they need and deserve.
And this is specifically targeted at individuals who expose minors to obscene
Yes.
and other harmful content. It creates new offenses of habitual indecent exposure and aggravated habitual indecent exposure. It would also propose to the court or direct the courts to determine if violators of these laws need to be put on the state sex offender
Yes.
registration list. And so the bill, I won't say the bill is breaking new ground, but it just enhances
Yes.
penalties and clarifies that the certain levels of offense and violations of the law with respect to exposing minors to this harmful type of content.
The internet can be a really good tool. It's a tool. It is a tool. It can be a great thing and it can be a not so great thing. Two bills that directly address that, HB 301 and HB 805. 301 speaks specifically to social media protections for minors. where is that? What's going on there? Of course, it has crossed over from the House to the Senate.
Yes. Well, this bill would basically say that a minor under the age of 14 cannot have a social media account. 14 and 15-year-olds can only have social media accounts if the social media platform, obtains the parents' consent.
Yes.
For those minors to have social media accounts. And so it really puts the onus on the social media platform operators to, first of all, eliminate all accounts that are held by individuals under 14, but then for 14 and 15-year-olds to obtain the parents' consent to keep those accounts active. And so it really is intended to help protect minors from the harmful effects, which we're just seeing more and more evidence of just continued exposure to all forms of social media.
And we'll talk more about wholesome content in just a minute. Another bill, HB 805, that did pass the House, it did cross over. It was unanimous and bipartisan. Many of these bills were bipartisan in one way, shape, or form. 805 seeks to protect women and children, their images online, specifically in pornographic use. Tell us what we need to know about that bill.
Yeah, and quite honestly, this is one we've kind of wrestled with because we don't think it's right. Anybody should be able to consent to being part of this kind of material being available. But this is what I know last session, I think we realized there's some creative ways to address this. That it was the age verification.
Yes.
And all of a sudden realized, hey, this is a way that actually certain parts of this material was actually shut down as far as access. So what this is, I understand, this is another approach to try to say, if we're going to require consent from people, it's a way to take that industry and hopefully clamp down on it, have penalties, severe penalties, for them to violate this, for putting information out there and not having consent.
Well, and it says that the operators of these websites are required to verify that the individuals whose images are being used in this awful and harmful content, but that they are 18 years of age or older.
Yes.
Right.
And also that the websites have their written consent for their images to be used in this. And by virtue of that, if the website's operators do not have verification of age and also written consent, then they are subject to significant penalties under this law, or under this bill, if it is enacted into law.
It would make it very burdensome for these pornographic websites to continue to operate in the state of North Carolina. I want to stop and thank all the people that have done this, but we're going to keep moving. If you want to know who the legislators were, once again, there's a link in the content below. You can click that link and find out who these people were that sponsored this significant legislation.
And these are the champions
of
these measures that we're talking about, those who stand up in committees and stand up on the floor of the House and the Senate and present these bills to their colleagues and encourage them to support these important measures. So definitely take note of who the sponsors are. If they are your representatives or senators, please reach out to them and thank them for their efforts to get good legislation passed in North Carolina.
And I know we've mentioned some of this legislation is contentious. This is one that was not. I mean, the vote was unanimous.
Yes, and had bipartisan support from the primary sponsor level all the way down.
Right.
Prohibiting objectionable say that 5 times fast. Words are hard sometimes. Content in schools. Several bills here. A Senate bill eliminating DEI in public education. As you pointed out, Jerry, some of these bills, the debate was a little warm. The room got a little heated during this. A bill that would basically take discriminatory practices and divisive concepts in public schools and put them to the side, get rid of them. That moved through the the Senate.
Right.
When was that? About a month and a half ago or so. It all seems like a blur as we track all these bills in and out of the building. Anything we need to know about that bill as it moves forward?
Well, of course, we know DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've heard that term a lot and have heard more about it in recent weeks as this legislation has moved through the General Assembly. Frankly, how harmful it is and how the notion of it being maybe a positive thing has really been, the light's been shined on that. And basically what it does is as a couple of examples, it says that public schools cannot teach content that suggests that, for example, one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex, or that an individual solely by virtue of his or her race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive. So these are the kinds of messages that are included in a lot of the initiatives, DEI initiatives that have moved throughout our culture. And so this is an effort by Senator Michael Lee and other members in the state Senate to curtail initiatives that would present these messages to our school children.
And this is, I know we've discussed this before, but I think it's worth repeating. The bill primary spokesperson was Senator Lee on these.
Yep.
Very eloquent spokesperson. He said these concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion in and of themselves are not a problem if they're properly defined and applied.
Correct. Right.
What he's pointed out are examples that you just cited, John, where people took those concepts and turned them into something.
An agenda.
Yet themselves were discriminatory.
Yeah.
You know, they were doing the opposite of what they were claiming to do. And this is why it's encouraging that legislators see the importance of addressing, especially what's going on in our school system. Yes. Students are being taught not just to consider and talk about these things. They're going, this is how you should think. This is right. This is wrong. Using those examples you talked about, John.
That's a great point, Jerry. Sometimes we hear what something is or what something isn't, and maybe what we're being told is somewhat misleading. This bill, HB 636, has been called a book ban, and I dare to even say that. As the sponsor of the bill said from the floor of the House, no one's banning these books. You can go get them if you'd like them. Of course, we don't encourage that because some of these books are downright pornographic in nature, but it's a bill that would promote wholesome content for students, specifically in school classrooms and libraries. Not public libraries, not in homes, but in school units, classrooms, and libraries.
Yeah. And this bill would set up like advisory councils that are appointed by the superintendent, the local superintendent of the school system, to review and advise regarding different library materials and make recommendations. It would also require the State Board of Education to maintain and make public an annually updated database of library media that's been rejected by school systems around the state, by these advisory committees, which are made up of parents and also school personnel. So they will be reviewing these materials, and the State Board of Education is going to maintain this list if this bill does pass, so that other school systems around the state can take advantage of the information that and the vetting process that has taken place in the school systems that have been reviewing materials.
And I know we mentioned this before, but for me, it's the most helpful way to understand this subject. You know, they were saying, oh, we're going to take award-winning books out of the hands of our students. And I still go back to those examples of people who've gone to their school board meetings and said, this is the book that I think should not be in our library. And they're going, well, you want to ban them? And they say, well, let me read from this book.
Stop.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
People go,
you can't read
it
that.
It doesn't matter what awards they have won.
Right.
If we're putting some of this, what would be for most everybody, highly objectionable material in our school libraries, in our classrooms. Again, thankfully, the legislature is trying to address this very troubling part of our society today.
If you follow our email updates and newsletters, one thing that we've written extensively about since the beginning of the year is cell phone use in schools. Two bills, very similar to one another. We'll kind of tack them together here, SB 55 and HB 87, speaking specifically about how school units, school districts handle the use of cell phones by students in the classroom or in the school day as a whole. Where they cross over, what is likely to happen in the next couple of weeks or months as a result of that.
Well, hopefully the House and the Senate will come together and pass one of these bills.
Yes.
The Senate bill is a little bit broader than the House bill in that it talks in terms of the wireless communication devices,
Right.
including cell phones, tablets, laptop computers, etc.
Yeah.
The House bill currently focuses really on cell phones.
Yes.
And so the Senate bill is a little bit broader, but this is an easy lift for our legislators, should they, and hopefully they will, choose to move forward. The Senate taking up the House bill or the House taking up the Senate bill and getting one of these bills enacted into law. It shouldn't be that difficult. I think in principle, clearly they agree with each other. It's just a matter of figuring out what the final version of the bill looks like.
And this is another example of the legislative process. Again, we tend to focus on all the division and the high emotions. This is another example, I think, pretty much unanimous support for these bills. It's going to also be interesting, though, even though it's pretty much unanimous, all these bills, as some of them were coming through, they went, we passed this last year and the year at the session before unanimously and sent it over to the other chamber and it didn't go anywhere. Hopefully that's not going to be the case with bills like this, because I think everybody is recognizing the harm that cell phones are doing as far as the education of our children, the distraction, the content, a whole lot of things are part of this that everybody came together and said, we need to do something.
And Jerry, I think that's an interesting point and a good point, that this is one of the benefits of the crossover deadline, that winnowing process, because the bills that make crossover are really become the high priority and the focus of the General Assembly, especially when you have two bills, a Senate bill and a House bill, that contain similar subject matter. So again, in principle, both chambers agree, and then it's just a matter of getting them to come together and expressing that will in a way that results in one of these bills being passed. And of course, they would have to agree upon what the form of that is before it moves forward. And then, of course, the governor has the opportunity to either support and sign the bill into law, to not take action, which then it would go into law after a certain period of time, or vetoing the bill and sending it back to the General Assembly. So you'll be hearing more about that down the road. But the fact that these two bills regarding cell phone use in schools both passed their chamber of origin suggests that there's a pretty good chance that something's going to happen on this issue before the end of session.
Speaking of focus and attention, thank you for sticking with us this long. You're a trooper. There's a lot here. Once again, you can click the link at the bottom of the video to learn more about all these. We're going to hit the high points of all these, including protections for detransitioners. That's not, if you type in detransitioner, there's still a red squiggly line under that because it's technically not a word. But people like Precia Mosley and Chloe Cole have made it a word, and their stories are so important for us to hear about people who have gone down that road and then said, wait, that's not who I was designed to be. I want to walk that back. And so this bill, HB 606, which has this really creative title called Civil Procedure Amendment. For those of you out there like me, you're like, what does that mean? John, Jerry, tell us what a Civil Procedure Amendment, HB 606, is.
Well, the reason that title is there is for any legal action, usually there's a limited period of time when an action can be brought, statute of limitations. Yes. What this bill would do is extend that out, because obviously what can happen is this, whether it's chemical treatments or surgery, which you may remember last session, that was outlawed for minors in North Carolina. But if these procedures have happened, and as you say, they get down the road and go, wait a minute, what have I done? I've done this horrible damage. And the stories, as you referred to, horrible things sometimes brought people to that point where they were told, you can either be an alive person who transitions, or you can be somebody who's dead who will take your life because you don't transition. Those led people to places where they maybe get down past what would be a normal statute of limitations. And what this bill is saying, now we're going to let these legal actions extend out beyond what would be a normal limitation on when action can be brought.
And so this bill specifically would extend the statute of limitations for lawsuits arising out of gender transition surgeries and problems related to that for 10 years from the day that the claimant reaches 18 years of age. So it would extend the statute of limitations for 10 years. And especially in situations where, and we've heard this from several individuals who have gone through this unfortunate circumstance and have decided, hey, this is not what I desire. They were really coerced by their doctors and others who attempted to influence them and not just affirm, but push them down this road. And with that significant influence on them, they made decisions that they later regretted. And so this bill addresses that. Again, as Jerry said, well, extends that statute of limitations for 10 years after the individual reaches 18 years of age. So they have ample time to pursue litigation if they feel that's necessary and appropriate in their circumstances.
One of the themes, I think, of this legislative biennium thus far has been promoting good, wholesome, safe education and classrooms and schools for students, whether it's been the DEI initiative or dismantling DEI in schools, prohibiting the use of cell phones, the wholesome content.
Social media.
Here's another one that just seems like a no-brainer, right? Making sure that kids don't have access to hemp-derived products on school grounds, both in public and in private schools. Now, no one's telling the private schools what they have to do, but encouraging them to do so. Representative Carla Cunningham has been at the forefront of this on banning Delta 8, Delta 9 products on school grounds. Tell us what we need to know about that. They both passed very overwhelmingly in the House, HB 328 and subsequently HB 329. What do we need to know about those bills?
Well, currently, it's important to note that on public school campuses that tobacco products are prohibited.
Yes.
The use of tobacco products. And so this would basically add hemp-derived products like Delta 8, Delta 9, TCHA, CBD products, or products that contain these substances or compounds. It would prohibit their use on public school grounds as well. And as you said, the other bill, House Bill 329, would encourage private schools, religious schools, and other non-public schools to adopt similar policies. So there's a consistent policy that these products are harmful, they're bad, and they have no place in the bodies of our students, but also on school grounds.
That's right. And that's where, again, I know it's a big area that the legislature hopefully is going to continue to try to address. So many of these substances are unregulated. Nobody even knows what's in the products that are being sold. We do know that a number of them are causing serious problems, physical, mental health problems. So they know one clear way to address this is don't allow them on school grounds.
Yep.
And so this is a big step, hopefully, and again, helping to improve our system of education. What happens when students are on campus? If they don't have access to cell phones, don't have access to these problematic substances, hopefully we're going to start seeing better outcomes in education.
Amen.
Sounds great. For kids like me, when I was in school, the fewer distractions, the better. So kids don't need distractions in school. Any other bills that we're working through that our listeners, the people tracking with us, need to know about, John?
Well, there are a lot of other measures out there besides these. Again, these are the highlights of select bills that did make the crossover deadline, which we wanted to bring to your attention. Again, as we've recognized, this is we're repeating some information that you've heard already about these bills, but this is really kind of a comprehensive summary of the top priority issues as we see it that were subject to crossover deadline that made crossover. There are a number of other bills and issues that are not subject to crossover, including, again, budget bills relating to the budget, appropriations, things of that nature that are still going to see action that we're not talking about today. So, and it's our understanding that the House is going to turn their focus, now that they passed crossover, to the budget. The state Senate passed their version of the budget several weeks ago, and now the House is going to take up deliberations regarding their version of the budget, presumably this next week. And so there will still be a lot of activity at the General Assembly, although we're still kind of waiting for the dust to settle a little bit after crossover.
So, Jerry, you mentioned this idea of differing and opposing worldviews. That seems to be something that we encounter often as we talk with people in the building, and most of the time those are very friendly discussions and debates. And there has been a little bit of tension in the last couple of weeks. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think we've mentioned this before. I want to mention it again. We understand that what's important is the information we're bringing to legislators to help them make what the decisions that we believe are best for the citizens. Just as important is the way that we do that. And so our worldview not only impacts what we're bringing to them as far as things like the understanding about how God creates us as male and female and what that means as far as parents and children. But as we discuss these, people with different worldviews, like I say, emotions can become, and God gives us emotions. I always try to remind myself, when, especially like with anger, is a clear one. God says, be angry, but do not sin, is for us and to learn, and I think we mentioned it for y'all as well. We love that you're working together with us, communicating with elected officials, that we do it can be a strong, also gracious and loving way, where the reason why we're doing it is because we care for the other people. We want what's best for them, and God has opened, by His grace, our understanding. I see He continues to open our understanding, and that we want to share that with people and share it in the right way. And we did notice, though, it's interesting, I think the tone this year seems to be better than it has at certain times, when people with differing views on both sides have been much more restrained, controlled, they've strong emotions, but very clear in expressing themselves. And of course, it's part of the rules is you're never supposed to attack the person that you're debating. That sometimes that line gets crossed.
Motive, intent, absolutely, yeah.
But it's a challenge for us, because some of these are very emotional for us as well. And that we continue to remind ourselves we want God to work and speak through us. Yeah. And so we, again, are very thankful for the way God is working through y'all as well together with us.
And I would say, just as a word of encouragement for our viewers, that despite the fact that there is political volatility there, and the people that often run for office are passionate about issues and perspectives, and so they're going to represent that when they are fulfilling their public service, especially in the halls of the legislature and in other arenas. But there's also a tremendous amount of collegiality that goes along behind the scenes. We saw it on a number of these bills where there was bipartisan support, some, in a few cases, actually unanimous support. There's a lot of collegiality, a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes among all members of the General Assembly. The media, of course, doesn't like to talk about that. They like to sensationalize things quite often and really focus on those things that are, show a separation in perspectives. But there's a lot that our legislators agree on, and so we often seek to find that common ground, because it really does come down to relationships. And as Jerry's saying, we're really grateful for you all to be a part of this process, because you, as you reach out to legislators that represent you in your district in particular, you have a natural opportunity and relationship with them. And we would encourage you to continue to build on those relationships so that when issues come up that you care about, that you have a regular avenue to go to your elected officials about. And so that they know who you are. Even if you just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm praying for you, I appreciate your sacrifices and your service, start there, but then reach out to them when issues come up that you have a concern or interest in.
So this was a week of finality, not only in the legislative building on May the 8th, but also, I think, what was the longest running election that was still undetermined in the country.
This election cycle.
From November, President Trump and all of that was our state Supreme Court race. This past Monday, May the 5th, the federal court, the district court, ruled in favor of Supreme Court Justice Riggs.
Yes.
And, of course, we know the margin was very thin. The State Board of Elections tells us it was 734 votes.
Out of like 5.5 million votes cast on Election Day. Yeah.
If that was a slice of pie, no one would want it. Very, very thin. A sliver of pie. Probably almost, yes. But Jefferson Griffin, of course, conceded the race and mentioned on May the 7th that he would not appeal the court's decision. So for those of you that hadn't heard or just now hearing, that race has now been called. It is final, and the Supreme Court is set.
So Allison Riggs retains her seat
Yes.
on the state Supreme Court. Jefferson Griffin retains his seat on the State Court of
Yes.
Appeals, and you can be a sitting judge if your seat is not up for election and run for another judicial seat, which is what he was doing in an attempt to move up to the North Carolina Supreme Court. But, yeah, as you said, Mitch, this race has seemingly finally been resolved.
And I guess, though, you could say it's another example of our government system and how it can work.
Yeah.
There were numerous appeals, various levels, state and federal court, and finally it did reach this conclusion. And that's where some people go, why is all this going on? Well, thankfully, we're living in a country where if there are questions and legitimate questions are asked, courts can bring them up, say, this is something for us to consider or it's not. And apparently there was something there, and more than apparently, because it did continue to go to different levels with different opinions at the different levels, but it is resolved now.
Well, and I think one of the big points about that this race demonstrates is that every vote counts.
Absolutely.
We talk about that during the election cycle as we put out our voter guides all across the state. But again, this race, statewide judicial race, over 5.5 million votes cast, and this race was decided, according to the State Board of Elections statistics, by 734 votes. So, again, that's slimmest of margins, but it does, again, show that every vote can count, and every vote really does count. So, as we enter into the election cycles coming up, pay attention and be an engaged and educated voter.
Well, gentlemen, if they've stuck with us this long, if you stuck with us this long, you deserve a gold star.
Yes.
And a giant thank you from us here at NC Family. Thank you for what you do to ensure that your values, our values, are not just heard at the legislative building, but across the state of North Carolina. So for our entire team at NC Family, John, Jerry, I'm Mitch, and thank you once again for watching another one of our legislative update videos.
Yep. Thank you all. God bless.